platforms. As I always remind everybody, we're live on the Educational Freedom Institute Facebook, the Educational Freedom Institute YouTube channel, my own YouTube channel, my Twitter account, and also my Facebook account. So if you want to choose a different platform, you might want to do that right now. But I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation. I don't know how we landed this discussion with our special guest today, Rebecca Friedrichs. Matthew will get into the formal introduction in a second, but just to show you really quickly, Rebecca was the lead plaintiff in a Supreme Court case taking on the teachers unions in California in 2016, Friedrichs versus California Teachers Association. So Rebecca Friedrichs is with us today. And again, I don't understand how we got so lucky to have Rebecca jump on with us today. But I'm really excited to talk about her adventure with taking on the California Teachers Union. And then also for the listeners, I want to point out that she has a book called Standing Up to Goliath. And for our listeners today, we'll be giving away a free hardcover version of this book. It's a great book. I recommend it to everyone. But yeah, Standing Up to Goliath. Make sure that you're commenting and commenting with any questions you have for us or any type of comment in general. And we're going to do a random selection from those comments after the show, and we'll ship you a free version of the book. Of course, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. We'll be paying for it. But either way, for the listeners, it'll be free. It'll be free at the point of consumption for the listeners today. But yeah, let's get into formal introductions, Matthew. I think we have a good amount of people that have hopped on.
Cool. Yeah. So I'm Matthew Nielsen. I'm the founder and board chair at the Educational Freedom Institute. Corey DeAngelis joins us as always. He's the executive director at EFI. He's also the director of school choice at the Reason Foundation and an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. Our special guest today is Rebecca Friedrichs, and she is the author of Standing Up to Goliath and the founder of For Kids and Country. She's famous for her court case that went all the way to the Supreme Court, as Corey mentioned, brought up the case. There it is. Friedrichs v. California Teachers Association, and she was the lead plaintiff. You weren't alone in that, Rebecca, but you were the lead there. So we're glad to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Like Corey said, we're excited to have you. We can't believe you said yes. So thanks for coming.
Absolutely.
Well, let's just start with the first question that we have. We always ask all of our guests, Rebecca. Just tell us about how you got into education in the first place. Obviously, you have a long history in education, but tell us what interested you in that and why you got involved.
Sure. Well, there's two things. So I knew from the time I was a very small child that I was going to be a teacher. It was just always my dream. I was probably that kid in kindergarten who was up at the board teaching. So just a natural teacher and love to help children to take large things and bring them down to small, and love to help them take the small up to the large. So there were a lot of times I had teachers who didn't do that for me, and I was feeling lost. And so I just felt like I wanted to help children to learn well. And then the second reason is I love liberty. There is nothing like this constitutional free republic in which we live here in America. Everyone around the world wants the freedoms that we have here. And I learned something about freedoms, and that is that our founders told us very clearly that there's only one way to keep a free republic, and that is to have a well-educated and moral citizenry. So I realized that our schools are key, absolutely key, for keeping a free republic. In fact, right now, our schools are the main battleground. And whether we keep or lose this free republic really is dependent on what happens in our schools. So that's why I am so passionate about education.
Awesome. So you were a teacher in California the whole time, and what did that look like? What was your tenure there?
Yes, so I taught 28 years in California public schools. I taught kindergarten through fourth grade, absolutely loved it. I resigned my position a couple of years ago in order to have the time to continue getting the voices of loving and great teachers out to the public, because their voices have been silenced by unions. And so I'm no longer in the classroom. I miss my students so much it hurts. I absolutely loved my profession, and my profession is under attack. So that's the only reason I'm not in the classroom right now.
So Rebecca, give us a little bit of background on your fight, with the teachers unions. A lot of people get this idea that the teachers unions are good for teachers. Why would you, a teacher in the public school system, have beef with the unions? What's up with that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So I'm going to give you kind of a long answer. So at the very beginning of my career, I was actually a student teacher. I was 22 years old, and I was learning from a master teacher who was absolutely remarkable. She was so great with those kids. They were little first graders, and they would come out of her classroom reading above grade level, confident. And this was in a low-income neighborhood with children from all over the world. So she was doing a great job. But next door to us was this teacher who was quite abusive. And in fact, I write about this teacher in, I don't know, the first or second chapter in my book. And this woman, every single day, I would witness as she would tower over these little 6-year-olds. They came up to her waist, and she'd scream at them. She'd grab them, she'd yank them. And, this was just to line them up after recess. And she especially picked on the wiggly little boys. And that always broke my heart, because these little boys, they didn't have the control to sit still all day long and stay. It was ridiculous what we're expecting them to do. And so now she's abusing them. So I went to my master teacher and I said, I'm learning about becoming a mandated reporter of child abuse, and I think I see some. And the problem is it's the teacher next door. And she sat me down, and now I'll never forget this day. She told me, Rebecca, that today's the day you learn about teachers unions. And she started to explain to me that this teacher had what was called tenure. And I didn't understand it at the time, but it's more than tenure. Tenure started off to be a good thing, to actually protect teachers from being accused. My husband's a 42-year educator, 37 years as a professor. So tenure was really important to protect. But unfortunately, it's been morphed and twisted by unions who have also included these collectively bargained grievance procedures, where it takes years to get rid of a bad teacher and millions of dollars. So this district was stuck with this lady, and these poor little kids were stuck with being abused every day. How do you learn the phonics? How do you learn how to read? How do you learn how to add and subtract when you're being abused every day by your teacher? I just thought that was so wrong. So I went to sign my first contract about 6 months later, and I just said, hey, I don't want to belong to an organization that spends my money to defend someone who abuses little kids. And they said, sorry, if you want to teach, you have to pay. So at that time I learned, here's how they lie to the public. They tell you teachers don't have to join the union. Well, that's true. I didn't have to join, and I didn't have to pay their dues, but I was forced to accept their representation I didn't want, and I was forced to pay them fees. The difference between dues and fees my first year of teaching was about $50 a year. So I was still paying them, I don't remember, $600 at that time. Now it's like $1,200 for most teachers. So I was paying them all this money to do things that were against my very belief and values as a teacher, and harming my students. And then I learned that they were spending the money on politics. What does that have to do with being a union? And so as I stayed in the teaching profession, I discovered that it was the teachers union that was defeating school choice. They were telling us in mandatory staff meetings, the union comes into every mandatory staff meeting, you can't escape. And they were telling us how we had to defeat school choice, because if we didn't, we were going to lose our jobs. They always painted this horrible picture. They lied to teachers. And they always made the parents the bad guy. the administrator's the bad guy, school choice the bad guy. Everybody was the bad guy. But here's what I discovered when I served as a union leader for 3 years. I stepped up and I was on the executive board of my local, and I went to state level meetings. And here's what I found out. Even a teacher paying those full dues who was a leader in the union didn't have a voice, because when I spoke up, I tried to get help for kids that needed special ed, special needs services that I couldn't get them help. The school wouldn't let me do it. And I went to the union, they wouldn't help. They made excuses. Everything I tried, the union wouldn't help, number one. And number two, they abused me. And they abused my friends. They bullied us. My book opens with a scene of them bullying 300 other teachers and me, when all we did was ask how voice and how our money's spent, how our dues are spent. And they silenced us and told us we had to think their way. That's abusive.
So I've got to ask you this, Rebecca, because I read your book probably, I don't know, 18 months ago or so, or a year ago, maybe. Anyway, great book. I thought it was fantastic, really well written and very interesting. In the meantime, after I'd read that, there has been another national convention of the NEA, and you know about this, I'm sure. That new business item number 2 was introduced in the 2019 NEA National Conference. Okay, so I just did some digging and I found who introduced that new business item, and I told Corey about this. You might not remember. You've been busy, Corey, but you did reply. You did say, "Oh, that's crazy." So I reached out to the person that introduced that new business item. New business item number 2, by the way, for our listeners. Oh, you're going to pull it up? I won't read it or try to. Yeah. So right here, it says the National Education Association, the NEA. It's the largest teachers union in the country. For everyone that's listening, they've got nearly $400 million every, or at least on their 2018 filing, coming in just in dues. And that's the national. That's not the locals. They have way more money than that. So 400 million nationally. The NEA will rededicate itself to the pursuit of increased student learning in every public school in America, ... NEA will not waver in its commitment to student learning.
Sounds pretty good to me.
Mm-hmm.
That's great, right?
Amazing.
Everyone would be like, that's fantastic.
That's what I want.
But that new business item, that agenda item, was put before the body, everyone that was gathered there last year at this convention, and it was defeated.
Yep.
And so I reached out to the person that introduced this new business item. I haven't gotten a reply. And I can guess why maybe I haven't gotten a reply. That individual is still employed by the NEA. But anyway, I wanted to throw that out there because I wanted to get your reaction to this.
Yeah. So that's exactly what I experienced the whole time I was within the union. So that new business item was brought by a teacher. I believe she's in Arkansas, if I remember right. So what happens at the NEA rep assembly or the state level is teachers bring forth new business items. That was probably a loving teacher who cares about the kids. And so she wants to bring forth this new business item on representing the teachers she knows, right, in her state. And so what does the NEA do? They shoot it down. And then at the same time, they pass new business items that all of them are political. They're all about this divisive stuff, working with Southern Poverty Law Center and ACLU and all these organizations that have nothing to do with representing teachers. And that's the problem. I'm so glad you pointed that one out. There was a second new business item she tried to pass too that was equally great, and they defeated that one too. But but they passed hundreds of them that were all about politics.
Yeah.
And if people, we have those posted on our website at forkidsandcountry.org. We have a menu item called Union Politics. And if your listeners just go there, or your viewers just go there, they can see the last 3 years worth of NEA new business items. If you'll just take a half an hour to read them, you'll be shocked at what they're doing with teacher money. This is why I fight. And by the way, you brought up the 400 million. What I'd really like to point out to people is the state unions get the lion's share of the money. So if a teacher pays about $1,000 a year, the local's keeping a little over $100. The state is getting like $800 a year or seven something, and then the national's getting like 192, and they keep upping the dues ever since we won at the court. Anyway, so teachers love their local union where their friends are standing together, but the state and national get all the money. And when you start adding it up, all 50 states, both national unions, NEA and AFT, it is about $5 billion, $5 billion annually, tax-free, and it's all collected by you, the taxpayer, through paycheck deductions. So,
amazing.
What's interesting to me is how you talked about how the union would be fighting against school choice, which doesn't make any sense if they're trying to fight for their constituents or the teachers, because school choice benefits teachers too. If you look at the evidence, whenever there's school choice competition in an area, the teachers in the public schools actually start getting paid a little more as well, because their employers have an incentive to actually spend the money wisely, which is on the employees. And I always like to, use like a Walmart example. Just imagine if you had like a Walmart workers union. If you're a worker of Walmart and you were striking, you wouldn't be striking against your customers, right? You wouldn't be striking against the customer's right to choose different options. You'd probably be striking against your employer, which would be Walmart, right? And so it doesn't make any sense for teachers to be striking, against the employer, or the competition, because the competition is what gives their employer a good incentive to actually spend their money on them. Because if they don't, they can go to a different employer.
Yes. And this is, you know what, Corey, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. And this is so true with every single thing that the unions support. Everything they back is bad for teachers. So let's just list a couple of them. School choice is one. Here's what they tell the teachers. I have heard this at least 1,000 times in mandatory staff meetings. School choice is bad. Here's why they say it's bad. They claim that children in home schools, private schools, charter schools, and all these schools are being taught by teachers who are not credentialed and aren't any good. Well, first thing I want to tell you, most credentialed programs don't teach you much. So, okay, these credentials aren't anything special. Second thing, all you have to do is look at the numbers. Most of the charter schools, the private schools, the home schools are getting better results. The kids are actually learning. So what's going on here is the unions are using our schools as a way to indoctrinate and to undermine our free republic. And that is the bottom line. And so what do? They manipulate teachers to believe that the other schools are bad because teachers love children. So they're truly manipulating. I've talked to so many teachers who tell me in the most passionate voice, well, we have to rescue the kids from the charter schools. And I'll say, have you ever visited a charter school? No, but they're all bad.
And why would you have to rescue kids from their own options? Like, that doesn't make any sense, does it? Like, it's like, oh, we're going to rescue you from being able to use your food stamps at Trader Joe's or Whole Foods. That doesn't make any sense.
Exactly.
Oh, we're going to make sure you use it at this government grocery store because it's bad for you if you choose anything else. That just, come on.
Exactly. It's none of it makes sense. This helps you to see how deeply indoctrinated teachers have become. They really love children. And they have been told, they've been filled over and over for decades with these lies, and that they're going to lose their jobs. If school choice wins, teachers are all going to lose their jobs. They don't think beyond, well, I could go get a job here. Well, we're
at
all
the charter school.
Exactly. But we're
Right.
all trapped. We're all trapped in this pension system. So the teachers believe I'm going to lose my pension if I go work here. So you can see how they've manipulated the teachers. Here's another thing. Now, I don't mean to get on a super controversial topic, but abortion is a controversial topic, and the teachers unions are 100% behind abortion, will only support anyone who supports abortion. But aren't they killing off future children that the teachers would want to teach?
Their future customers.
Exactly.
Right.
So with your example about the Walmart, it doesn't make any sense. Why would a teachers union be supporting abortion when teachers, they're actually bringing down the number of teacher jobs that we need because they're.
I mean, it seems like the big issue is just the controversy. I'm sure there's some teachers who might, support that, but it seems like it's unrelated to
Right.
what they should be representing, right? It should just be about improving education. Doesn't make any sense why they're diving into all this political stuff. And then there's a lot of teachers like yourself who may have issue with the particular politics that they're engaging in. And so I think that's just for the listeners, that's kind of why you brought this to the Supreme Court, right? And I think the argument was about this First Amendment right, that you shouldn't have to pay these union dues and support this political speech that you inherently disagree with. And so I want to ask, I'm more well versed in the more recent Mark Janus case, and this was similar to yours. I mean, this is pretty. Would you say this is like the same outcome of this? The outcome of this case, is it the same that of the case of your case against the California Teachers Association? Would it have made the mandatory dues unconstitutional, or what if any are there any differences?
Yeah, so Mark Janus's case was actually built after our case was moving through the pipeline, and thank God they built it, because when Scalia died and our case ended up with a tie, we needed another case to come. But the Janus case was not as thorough as our case. Our case was seeking to do three things. Number one, end forced unionism. So no one's forced to pay a union. Mark Janus's case did that. When he won, no one's forced to pay anymore. We're still forced to have representation, but we're not forced to pay. But our case was also asking for paycheck protection. In other words, we didn't think that the taxpayers should have to collect dues for a private organization and then hand them over. I mean, you got to give the devil his due, right? That they able to pull that off. So we said, give us paycheck protection. Janus didn't ask for that, unfortunately. So they're still collecting dues out of paychecks. The third thing we asked for was let teachers, and by the way, all public sector employees are covered under this, the WIN. We were asking, let them opt in to the union, not go automatically in and they've got to figure out how to opt out. So Mark Janus didn't ask for that, but gratefully, a whole horde of teachers and I submitted a brief, and we begged the Supreme Court, will you please also give Mark Janus this opt-in rather than opt-out? And they gave it. They gave it. So the problem is, if you were already in a union the day Janus won on June 27th, 2018. If you were already in the union, you're still in. Yeah. You have to opt out. But if you're a brand new employee, they have to convince you to opt in. So what did the unions do? They passed all these things they called Friedrichs fixes. And in
Friedrichs.
Yeah, that'd be me. So in any state that they run, and they run any state that's controlled by Democrats, unfortunately, in any state that they run, they passed special laws to give them special rights. So now, especially in my I'm in California, state of Washington, if you get a job as a teacher or public sector employee, you now have to sit with the union for 30 minutes to be manipulated and indoctrinated by them. That's just one of the fixes they passed in order to give themselves an edge. Nobody else is allowed to be in that meeting. So
this is, did you tell this story while we were live or before we went live? But there's a story from a book. From your book, like the first chapter, is it from the first chapter, the 90-year-old teacher?
Yeah. Okay. That was before.
I don't know if our listeners heard that, but that just reminds me of that, right? So, and maybe you don't have to tell the whole story. We can move on to something else, but go ahead.
I'd love to tell it. So it's a story about my friend, Ruth Finnegan. Ruth is 90 years old right now, maybe 91, maybe she had a birthday. She's from Pennsylvania. And Ruth was the most loving, excellent teacher, teaching in Hershey, Pennsylvania. This is in the 1960s. And the union came into her school and said, we're unionizing you, and it has to be 100%. Everybody has to join. There's Ruth. I just love her. So Ruth was the holdout. She goes, what do you do for me? And they couldn't tell her anything they did for her. And she said, I don't want a union. We're fine. We're happy. Our job is great. The kids are learning. Well, Unfortunately, all of her friends joined the union, and she started to ask them, why are you joining? Do you want to join? And every single friend said, no, I don't want to join. I'm just terrified. If you don't join a union, they make your life miserable. So I'm joining because I don't want to lose my job. So Ruth, being brave, held out. Do you want to know what happened to her? She's sitting in the classroom after school one day grading papers. This is a young woman. And 5 men in black suits came in to harass her, to convince her that she better join the union. And she's going to need them to defend her in case she gets sued. She's so brave, she still did not join, but she kept trying to bring her friends together. She kept saying, look, if we stand together against this, we can stop it. Everybody was too afraid. She was alone. So the second time the men in black suits came to her classroom, twice, they came again to harass a young woman. That is abusive mafia tactics.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they did. And she finally caved and joined. And those sorts of mafia tactics are exactly what the unions have been using for decades to terrify teachers. That's how they got them in. And now they use manipulation and lies and get you connected into their system, where if you leave the system, like if you leave from one district to another, you take a pay cut. If you leave their system, you don't have your pension. They've got you trapped. So that's what they do. They use tactics and they trap you.
So what do you think is the next step? I mean, the Mark Janus case, they won recently in the Supreme Court that, and you just went over that. Is there a next step? Is there another case down the line that you think is necessary? Or what's the next action step for either just teachers, members of society, court cases, anything?
Yeah, well, there's a bunch of steps. So when we were on our way to the Supreme Court, I remember everyone who asked me, "Oh, is your case the end all? This is the answer." I'd tell them, "Look, when we win, celebrate for 30 minutes, and then move on. We got to get back to work, because winning the case was the first domino to fall. Now that the case is won, we have so much more work to do. These unions have infiltrated every government agency, and they are literally trying to undermine our free republic. So we have a lot of work to do. There is a case on its way to the court right now that is a case to end monopoly bargaining. So the teachers' unions claim that a teacher like me, they'll say, oh, that's a free rider. Those teachers want our representation and they don't want to pay anything. They never mention two things. Number one, they're not representing us at all. They're abusing us and using us to push their politics. Number two, they never mention that they're the ones that forced the courts to give them the right to have monopoly bargaining power. So they have all this power. So we can't bring in our own. I can't go out and get my own, someone to bargain for me. I can't bargain for myself. So we're all stuck with them. So there's a case on its way to the court that's challenging monopoly bargaining. That's an important case to watch. Go ahead.
What's interesting to me is I was talking to a constitutional lawyer about this the other day. I won't give you his name, maybe offline. But, if you take the logic of the Janus case about, mandatory dues inhibiting your right to free speech, right? Because it's funding, political speech that you don't agree with. Can't we take that same logic to the classroom level or the student or the family level? We see a lot of political indoctrination happening in schools today, yet taxpayers are still forced to pay to fund those schools, and taxpayers are compelled to have some type of education for their children. And most often that means you essentially just have to send your kid to the government-run school. Do you think that logic could be applied to the family level, that, look, this is inherently against my views, and so the current system, without school choice, that is, essentially forces me to pay for speech in the classroom and political indoctrination in the classroom that I don't agree with?
Yeah, you know what? Number one, I am thrilled to hear you've been talking to a constitutional lawyer about this. Whoever it is, please talk to me. I have plaintiffs for you. I have teacher plaintiffs and parent plaintiffs who would bring that case. That is a very important case that you just articulated. Here's what's going on in our public schools. Because the government is funding the public schools, and the teachers unions have a stronghold in what happens in these government-run schools. We are now teaching America's kids a very radical sex education program. It's I'll get into it if you want me to.
Let's get into it. Let's go.
I write three chapters about this in my book. And it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable what teachers like myself, personal friends of mine, have been taught. I'll just tell you one. One of my friends in a teacher in service in a large school district here in California during paid hours at the school site was taught that we have to teach children these 19 different forms of birth control, and one of them is called a dental dam, and it's a piece of vinyl about this wide, and we're supposed to teach the children to use that dental dam as a shield between their mouth and their partner's vulva, vagina, or anus. So they're telling teachers like me that we have to teach children about oral and anal sex. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. That is not the job of an educator. If a parent wants to teach their child that's a parent's prerogative.
Yeah, and I think even if you buy the argument that this is a valuable thing to be learned, that's not the same thing as saying that it needs to be done in the classroom. And I think the main issue here is that there's a lot of families, even if there's some families that think it's a good idea, there's a lot of families that might not think it's a good idea. And so I think the main policy conclusion here is we need to let people choose their schools based on these things that they may inherently agree or disagree with.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And another thing they're doing, Corey and Matthew, is when they put, because I live in California, the tip of the spear here, when they push these policies in California, they've actually passed a law. They call it the California Healthy Youth Act. And what people need to be aware of is something called comprehensive sexuality education. We have a lot about it on our website under sex ed. I call it SEXXX ed.
Triple X.
Yeah, because it is. A picture's worth 1,000 words, right? Triple X. I was just going to say that they've been pushing this through the United Nations for decades. And they have been, in California, they've been able to put in a law that forces us to teach this. And unfortunately, in this law, school districts are not allowed to say to parents, here, we want you to see all this information and now you can choose to opt in. Again, the union's typical tactic, you can only opt out. So they send home a letter. If the parent doesn't see the letter, the child's in. And maybe the parent doesn't want their child learning all of this sexual stuff that is inappropriate. And some of these kids are 11 years old.
So you know what's crazy too about this? That's all crazy. Here's some more crazy on that same note. I have kids, and as a parent, there was a program that was coming into my daughter's classroom. She was a freshman in high school. And I said, I'd like to see that curriculum. I can't find it anywhere online. That I do searches and I can find the organization that publishes it, but I can't find the curriculum anywhere.
Yep.
And obviously I was interested in that particular piece of curriculum because there were some just words that kind of cued me in to like, that seems strange and not appropriate for school. Right. That's something that I would talk with my kids about at home. And so I emailed the teacher, who it would be in her homeroom class. Her first class is where this was slated for. And I was told, not just by the teacher, but then by administrators as well at the school, that I could only view the curriculum if I went to the school and set an appointment, go to the school, sit down in front of the administrator that was in charge of the curriculum, because they have like, a designated person who, I don't know what to call that, but someone that was managing that and coordinating that for the campus for that school. And so I would have to go and sit down in front of this person and they would show me the curriculum, and I couldn't take it with me. I couldn't like take pictures or anything.
They don't want
like
you to
that.
post it on the internet.
Right.
Exactly.
That's exactly it. And so there's some more crazy for you. It's like, not only it's an opt-out only program, not only is it, being done just like by default to all the kids at whether you like it or not, but you can't even view it with any measure of, like.
Well, they don't want it blowing up on social media, right? That's
right.
the problem, right? I mean, we saw like some of the political stuff going on in Arizona a few months ago with the teacher that had the whiteboard, and they were drawing links between the Second Amendment and conservative values to genocide and
Hitler,
fascism, and that blew up. And Donald Trump Jr. Retweeted it, and it got a lot of media attention. And I think that's the issue here. They don't want that transparency. But if you truly stand behind whatever curriculum you have in your school, you should be more than happy with sharing that and putting sunlight on it. And if you don't, you should question whether that should be in the curriculum or not.
Exactly. Right. And it's just it's so infuriating. And the problem is that why were they keeping you, a parent? You're not only a taxpayer paying for it, but you're a parent with children that's in the school. They don't want you to see what's in there because they want to indoctrinate your child, and they don't want you to know they're doing it. And they do the same thing to teachers. They hide things from us because they know we would be mortified and we would never do it. Now, if a teacher sees this, because I don't want your viewers to go away angry at teachers. I want them to understand what's happening to teachers. So what's being written into these laws is, if the teacher's not qualified to teach this, then the experts will come in and do it. Okay, why does it say that? Because no loving teacher would ever undermine a parent or teach inappropriate things to a child. We're talking little kids here. And no teacher would do that. But when we won't do it, Planned Parenthood steps in and does it.
Oh, wow.
And that's insane.
Planned Parenthood has contracts with multiple school districts around this country today. And the stuff that they're teaching your kids is unbelievable. And as early as preschool, they're telling children, your parents, they won't call you mommy and daddy anymore because that's assuming a gender. They'll say your parents didn't know your gender when you were born, so they assigned you a gender, and you will figure out your gender someday. And there's really an endless spectrum of genders, and you can choose. You can be a tree or there's all these pronouns. And I kid you not, this is being pushed by the teachers' unions into our public schools through multiple, like 180 different organizations that work together. And teachers don't have any idea that they are funding this nightmare. This is why I fought for teachers to be freed from paying them.
And I like the point, I usually, when I approach this conversation, I approach the idea that, there may be some parents who disagree with these things, but I like that you point out that the teachers too, these types of top-down policies are taking away their autonomy and forcing them to teach things that they may inherently disagree with as well, which that kind of gets into this idea of, pretty much the government compelling a teacher to recite information or pretty much controlling their speech in the classroom. It's not just that it's, compelling the teacher to fund certain programs. It's going a step further, and essentially, if the teachers want to keep their job, compelling them to teach political things in the classroom, even if they don't want, so it's not even the fault of the teachers. And I think that's a really good point.
That's right.
To talk about. I want to get your take on one of the most recent things that I shared yesterday. This was actually from the UK, and a homework assignment. And it kind of blew up on social media yesterday. But this was a part of a homework assignment for 11 to 14-year-olds, and I had all these definitions. So Rebecca, what's your take on this? I do want to point out that this was a religious school, and I did some more research into this because I was like, well, I wouldn't expect a religious school to have this kind of stuff and built into their curriculum. But it turns out in the UK they have new guidelines that. And a new law in September of 2020 coming up. All religious schools, all schools, religious or non-religious, private or not non-private, will be compelled to have sex education in them, and it needs to be a certain type of sex education. So it's not that they can, opt out at all. They can't even opt out of sex education. It's not that if you do have sex education, you have to do it this way. It's religious schools and non-religious schools are being compelled to do this in the UK, which I thought was interesting. So I just wanted to get your take on that, since it's a pretty recent thing that popped up in the media.
Yeah, I am so glad you asked about this. I have three different things to say. I wrote myself a note here so I won't forget. So first of all, this is why so many people are concerned about any kind of government money coming into schools, because they start telling you what to teach and how to teach. And it's often not only horrible teaching, but abusive, as it is in this case. Again, comprehensive sexuality education, CSE, is what is pushing all of this. Came through the United Nations. So people need to do some research on that. They can find it on our website under the sex ed. I saw the words drag queen on there. I want the teachers in the audience to know, and everyone else, if you're not a teacher, would you please adopt one? We have a program called Adopt a Teacher. I can't get to every teacher. There's millions of them. Could you please put your arms around them, adopt them? Because here's why. Last year, Matt was talking about the NEA Rep Assembly and how they defeated New Business Item 2. Well, you know what else they did last year at the NEA Representative Assembly? This is where 8,000 teachers converge in one place. It was in Texas last year, and they're supposed to pass new business items for supposedly representing teachers. They never really do represent us. Well, you know how they started the program? On July 1st, they had a drag queen event, actually drag queen and king. And they had this massive ballroom, and I was just writing about this. I haven't even published this yet, but massive ballroom where they had about, 300-400 people in there. And this is how they said they were going to entertain the teachers. And they start a drag queen and drag king show, and where the guy is just belting out disgusting things. Teachers, you're funding this. This is what goes on. What does this have to do with passing new business items to represent teachers? What does this have to do with being a union? Can somebody please answer me that question? What does a drag queen event have to do? Why are they spending teacher union dues that way? So teachers need to know that. The next thing is, just the other day, I hope your viewers will type in Healthy Teen Network. There's this Healthy Teen Network that is working with these 180 coalition that the teachers unions work with. And they are right now sending virtual learning to kids in California. I don't know if it's gone out of my state or not, but I looked at it yesterday. They were telling children that they should get involved in sexting, SEXTING, sending sex. Wait a minute. I thought that was dangerous. I don't know any parent that would tell their child to sext. They're telling our kids to look at online porn and that there are experts who can help them with this. And they're telling our kids to have solo sex during the COVID-19, because if you're bored, well, you can have solo sex. So they're teaching them, and there's even they can learn how to masturbate. This is unbelievable. Okay, fine if you're okay with it with your own family, but this is not what our schools are about. This is not what we're supposed to be teaching kids.
So so this is for everyone in the audience that is thinking to themselves, but I'm okay with all of those things for my own kids. That's fine. You can be okay with all of that for your own kids. You have your individual freedoms, and that's your right if that's what you want to do. Here's the problem. We live in a society with compulsory education laws. The majority, what's the number, Corey?
82% are in government schools.
82%. There's the number. 82% are going, because they're compelled to, they're going to a school, and they're in schools where that are controlled by these teacher unions at a national level. So that's where that's the rub, right? If everyone had absolute 100% freedom to pick from 5, 6, 10, 15 different options for educational service providers / schools in their neighborhood, then wouldn't be an issue, because we'd say, well, I'm picking one that fits my values, my family's beliefs, my, all of that kind of stuff, right? We don't have those choices right now. That's not the way that this is. It's not the society that we live in.
And then you would also imagine, a society like what Matthew's putting forth, it would be good for teachers too, because then they could sort to the schools that give them the autonomy to be able to, teach in the way they want, or, also they can compete on salaries, obviously, but, then they could sort and vote with their feet, just like families could vote with their feet.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a win-win for everybody.
Yep.
Yeah, and you know what, guys? I'd just like to add something to that, because we started this conversation with the only way to keep a free republic is with a well-educated and moral citizenry. By moral, like put others first, be kind, okay? So the problem with these schools is, because this is an agenda, what people have to see is people get stuck in the weeds. They think, oh, but I'm okay with it, but you're not. And then they argue about these issues up in the branch. No, let's get to the root of the issue here. We've got an organization that call themselves unions that are not unions, that call themselves teachers that are not teachers, that are pushing and literally pushing a very radical agenda through our schools in order to undermine our republic. Okay, so if they're going to spend all their time teaching our kids to be social justice warriors for their agenda against our freedoms, and they're going to spend all their time sexualizing our children for their agenda against our freedoms, but they're not teaching them how to read, they're not teaching them how to write. Corey, I think last week you posted some numbers, the new NAEP scores or something.
Yeah.
History was like 15%. Okay,
Civics,
I can tell you why. I can tell you exactly why only 15% of our kids are passing civics. It's because we're not teaching it anymore. The kids that passed it are the ones that were homeschooled or in a private school or whatever. And I can tell you this too. As a teacher, when Common Core came into my school, I'll never forget it. They told us, you need to teach this new Common Core. And we said, what is it? And they said, we don't know. It hasn't been written yet. Okay, but they were going to teach it because they were given a carrot. They were given a carrot by the Obama administration that if they took Common Core, they didn't have to meet the standards under No Child Left Behind. So they jumped in because it's all about money and not being able to meet standards. Okay, so here we are, teachers, we're scrambling. We're told we have to teach something, we don't know what it is. Then what do? They rescue us. Oh, you have to teach this, but we don't know what it is. We've rescued you. We've created, I kid you not, they created websites. And in my district, I had access to 2 websites. I was told, you may not share this website with anyone. You can only access it from work. You have to have a code, and you can't show it to the parents. Once I got onto these websites and I started reading the things they were teaching through these Common Core websites, like George Washington was a bad guy, and all they focused on was that he had slaves. They didn't focus on anything else. Okay, this is an agenda. So what people have to wake up to is we've got to quit arguing about, oh, well, I'm okay with that and I'm okay with it. They're after us. They're after indoctrinating the kids, and they're not teaching them. This is supposed to be an educational system. The kids aren't reading, they're not writing, they're not learning common sense or how to think critically. They're not learning our history, so they're going to be doomed to repeat the bad stuff. It's on purpose. And so that's what we have to focus on.
So let's see. We should shift just for a second here, Rebecca. Tell us about your organization. Tell us about For Kids and Country.
Sure. So I wrote that book that you showed your audience, and the thought was, okay, here's a book full of the stories of about 45 brave teachers from across the country who let me share their testimony of how their jobs were destroyed by unions, or their students were hurt, and there's some parents, how their children were hurt. And I thought, how do we bring everybody back together again? The unions have divided everyone. How do we bring them back together? So we started this nonprofit For Kids and Country. And our goal is to bring education stakeholders back together again so that we can't be divided and conquered anymore, so that we can fight for what's right, so that we can restore our educational system, so that we can protect our kids, so that we can protect our freedoms, our liberties, and protect our constitutional republic. So our goal is to amplify the voices of great teachers who are doing a great job but are being silenced, to connect them with good parents who care, and other education stakeholders, leaders, policy makers, and just to bring us all together for the good of kids and country. So that's why we called it For Kids and Country.
I have something I wanted to get Rebecca to comment on. I really loved, the title of this book and when it came out, and it was really interesting. And I thought it, it makes a lot of sense. You're standing up to Goliath. I mean, Goliath is the monopoly system, right? And it's the teachers unions, which are extremely politically powerful. But then right after your book came out, an opposing book came out by DeAnne Ravitch. And what's really weird is that she kind of she plays off of your title, I think. I don't know if you have any of the background information on this, but look, I mean, yours is standing up to Goliath. DeAnne Ravitch comes back, and if people don't know who are listening, DeAnne Ravitch is a fierce opponent of school choice and a big promoter of protecting the status quo monopoly government system of teachers unions. So yeah, what's the deal with this? I mean, hers doesn't make sense to me, in that she's saying that, school choice is Goliath, when it's like, well, I mean, private schools are only like 10% of the market share in K-12 education, and, about 90% or 80% is the government-run system. That seems to be more like Goliath, the monopoly. But what's your take? And, is there any backstory to, the two titles?
Yeah, isn't that something? I'm so glad you brought this up. So I don't know DeAnne Ravitch. I mean, I know who she is, and her book actually attacks parents and teachers like me and calls us Goliath because we dare to stand up for what's right for kids and to give people choice, just to give people the freedoms they deserve. So this is what teachers unions and their friends do. I hate to say it, but they don't have very many original ideas. And so it's just true. And so when someone works really hard, like I did, I mean, it took me a year to come up with my title. For me personally, a lot of prayer and just, what is this title going to be? And the unions are a Goliath. Why? If you know the story of David and Goliath, David was this one little guy, and he's standing up against this massive giant, and it was impossible odds. And so here we were, 10 little teachers standing up against the most giant public unions in the country, the most wealthy, and we sued the National Education Association and the California Teachers Association. And then Kamala Harris intervened, and the state of California was against us, and the Obama administration intervened, and the whole country was against us. So we were 10 teachers standing up against the entire nation of political giants. That's a Goliath, and we're hurling our little stones at them, right? And so, the book title made sense, and the subtitle is Battling State and National Teachers Unions for the Heart and Soul of Our Kids and Country. And then DeAnne Ravitch, who's in that Goliath camp, comes out and calls parents and loving teachers Goliath because we fight for school choice. I think it's hypocritical. I think it's kind of desperate, but here's the good news. They noticed my book was out there.
Yep.
That's the good news.
It's true.
I got them mad, I guess. Good.
It's true. So here's a question that and I'll just preface this question with a couple of anecdotes, and I won't go into specifics necessarily, but from time to time, I have people reach out to me on Twitter or through other social media platforms, and they'll say, I'm a teacher. I am stuck in a union. I don't want to be in the union, but here's my problem. They take care of my insurance, and they do my, they're my representative and all this stuff. And they're like, I don't want to give up the security that they provide in one sense, but I don't like what they're doing on the other hand. And so I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I've had a few of these people reach out to me with that concern. And so I wanted to get it. You must have the same thing, like times 100. You must get people talking to you about this all the time. So tell us, what are some concerns teachers have? I assume that they share a lot of your concerns, but then what are some things that teachers tell you or they say to you, but they won't say to anybody else? Mm-hmm. Or if they're in, like out of earshot, like then, okay, now it's safe. And I'm with someone that I trust.
Yeah, I am so thankful to you for asking this question, because what's happened, the unions have gotten so cruel that Americans are starting to hate teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And teachers are the most loving. We used to be the number one when they do that annual survey. I have this in my book. We were number one, the most loved and respected profession, and we are falling fast. Last time I looked, we were at 11. We're probably dead last now. Labor unions were dead last. So what they've done is they've brought us down to their level in the eyes of the American people. And that's a tragedy, because most of the teachers I know are very, very dedicated to their students, work very hard, love the kids, are respectful of the parents, and want to work as a team. So what do they say to me when nobody's listening? First of all, during our case, the number one most common question I was asked thousands of times: are you afraid for your life? Are you afraid for your life? We need to think about that. That if people are that terrified of unions, that they were worried that I was going to die, what does that say about unions in a free
that's
country?
crazy.
Yeah. Their second most common question was, are you afraid for your job? Teachers are terrified of losing their job. Look, they have mortgages, they have children they need to feed. They're like every other American that just needs their job. And they went into teaching because they believe in it and they love kids, and they find themselves in this social political nightmare thanks to unions. So what do they say to me? I was on the phone with one yesterday. I talked to thousands of teachers around the country. You're dead on, Matt. They all love their local friends and their representation, but they're all upset with the national and the state unions. I fight for something called Keep Your Local. Teachers have always had the right to decertify and to have a local association only. The problem is the unions make it a nightmare. There's a story about it in my book if people want to read about it. This teacher to this day is harmed and hurt inside because of what she went through trying to decertify. So I ask people, come alongside teachers. If parents and others and community would stand with the teachers, they could decertify, no problem. They just need help. Teachers can't do it alone anymore. They can't stand alone. They need help. So that's the first thing I'd say. And then the other thing is, teachers are heartbroken right now, demoralized. Some of them have PTSD because of the anti-discipline policies that have turned our classrooms into war zones. We'll send kids to the office for discipline and they come back with a lollipop. We'll try to discipline kids. I mean, my last classroom, I had several kids in my class who were severe discipline problems, who I could have controlled in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no support anymore. And I'd send them out and they'd be back in 5 minutes with a note: dear Mrs. Friedrichs, I'm so sorry. I disrupted the class. I'll never do it again. And then they do it again in 30 seconds all year long. So teachers are demoralized. They are frustrated. A lot of teachers are retiring early. And people think, okay, well, no big deal. It's a big deal because they're being replaced by younger teachers who've been indoctrinated and who don't know better and come into the system and start teaching the bad stuff or, just buying into the lies. So it's really important that we defend teachers right now and stand with them and remember that many of them are deeply patriotic, loving people who have really been abused for a really long time. And they call me so much that I can't keep up. That's our biggest struggle for Kids and Country is we don't have a big staff, and teachers are in such desperate need of help. They need lawyers. So I want to say one last thing. If you're a teacher out there, or if you're someone who knows a teacher, and you leave the union only gives you $1 million of liability coverage. They keep telling you you're going to get sued if you leave them. They don't really defend you unless you're doing what they want. They only give you $1 million. There are independent organizations, Christian Educators Association International and Association of American Educators. They're both on our website, where you can get double the coverage, $2 million per incident for a fraction of the cost, a couple $100 a year, and you don't have to be in the union. And they will actually send a lawyer when you need help. They'll actually answer your call when you call, unlike the unions. So you do have options, teachers. And those of you that aren't teachers, please educate them. Take them to our website so that we have a menu item called Teacher Freedom, I think, or something like that. Get them on that drop-down menu. All the information they need is right there.
That's good. Those are good resources. Corey, you had something?
Oh no, I was going to ask. What did the discipline? When did the discipline and policy start to change? And could you go over like an example of when you were a teacher? Like, this is like an example of what would happen, and here's a discipline policy that was in place before, and how has it changed since then? Is it just lax discipline where you can't really you can send them to the office but nothing happens? Is that like the gist of it?
That's kind of how it used to be. Unfortunately, for a long time, the discipline has been waning in our schools, public schools. I never felt like I had enough support. I did most of it myself, constantly calling parents, and hardly anybody was following up, unfortunately. But it got worse because the Obama administration wrote a letter called the Dear Colleague letter. And in that letter, school district superintendents were told that they could no longer suspend children based on the color of their skin. So instead of what Dr. Martin Luther King dreamed of, I have a dream that my child will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Suddenly, any children that had any kind of pigment in their skin, we had to lower the suspension for those kids. So they set us arbitrary numbers. It all has to do with money. This is where people have to realize when you attach things to money, it's a mess. It causes corruption. So they connected money to suspensions. So you had to bring your suspensions down to an arbitrary level. If you did, you would get the money from the federal government, extra money. If you didn't, you would lose money. So school districts started not disciplining kids because they wanted the money from the Obama administration. Now, a worse thing happened in California and will happen in other blue states, and that is that our governor and our legislature, led by the teachers' unions. They will lie to teachers and they will say they're not involved in this, but they are. They put into office all the people who passed it too. So they have passed I forget the assembly bill or Senate bill, I can't remember the number, but they passed this law that we are no longer allowed in the state of California to suspend a child for willful defiance of an authority figure. So you can throw a chair at a teacher, willfully defy the principal, whatever, and you're not going to get suspended for that. It's dangerous. And so what we've watched happen here in our state, last year, a little boy was killed. And in my opinion, I wrote an editorial on it. In my opinion, it's because of these policies. This little boy's family, this was in San Bernardino, they kept going to the school and asking the school to deal with the bullying. There were some boys bullying him nonstop. The school said they would do something about it. They didn't. They said they would suspend these boys. They didn't. And the following week, this young man was actually sucker punched at school and killed. He was killed. A little boy, a middle schooler. His name was Diego. It's tragic. And it never had to happen. It was because children who were bullying were never punished. And so what's happening is the children and parents who are bullies are being empowered, and those who want to be protected are being damaged. Yep, that's the editorial right there. Thank you for showing your viewers.
So we talked with Max Eden about similar topic a couple of weeks ago. You may know of Max's work, Rebecca.
I love Max. He's great.
Yeah. So same basic ideas, right? That teachers' hands are tied in certain ways that cause unintended consequences. Because you might look at that and say, well, in a vacuum, that's a great policy because it could have positive effects, first order effects. The problem is there are unintended consequences a lot of times when we enact certain policies. And of course, the tragedy in Parkland that we talked with Max about is kind of an extreme example, obviously. But there's another one that you just mentioned where policies are enacted that maybe are well-meaning, but in practice, they turn into tragedy. And so anyway, for those that are listening or watching, there's more on that from our conversation with Max a couple of weeks ago. But Corey, did you have anything else? I had one more question that slipped my mind now, but it was a good one. I promise.
You can go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I can't remember it.
Oh,
I wish I could.
Well, I wanted to remind everyone to make sure they bought Rebecca Friedrichs' book, Standing Up to Goliath. She promised us an hour, and we've already gone a little bit over an hour. But Matthew, while you're thinking about that, Rebecca, do you have any closing thoughts? Or, I can sit here for a lot longer, so you can take as long as you want for the closing thoughts. But what's I know. What's the main message you want to get to our listeners if they only listen to the last few minutes?
Oh, wow. I guess my main message would be that this is so much bigger than education. That I know that people love unions. Unions have a good reputation from the past. They used to do some really good things. My dad was a welder. My son's a welder, a non-union. My son is a non-union welder. I'm very happy about it. But my dad was in unions. They were all in unions, and people saw unions as a good thing. But I would like people to think about, oftentimes what happens is evil comes in and it infiltrates good. So the unions aren't doing what they used to do. They've become what they used to fight. And they are, if you were trying to do something to undermine an amazing country like ours, what would you do if you were the person trying to do that, undermining? You would find the sweetest, most wonderful people to be your face. And that's what they did. They've taken over teachers, and they've undermined our wonderful profession. And they did it right under our noses because everyone trusts teachers, or at least they used to. And so they came into our schools and undermined our schools. They have undermined parental authority. In my state, you can take a child at any age now for an abortion without parental knowledge or permission. And they're trying to push that they want to give the kids pills or hormones to change their gender without parental knowledge or permission. That's evil. I'll call it what it is. You don't undermine a parent like that. The children don't belong to the state. The children don't belong to the government or the union. The children belong to their parents, and the parents should have authority. And so I guess my bigger message would be that this is so much bigger than the schools. And I hope that people that care about our freedoms and care and want to live in a free country, a free republic like we do here in America, if you want to save those freedoms, you will get your arms around teachers and stand with them and start to stand together. Because if teachers will stop funding these unions and other public sector employees too, they're collecting tens of billions a year when you count DMV workers and IRS workers and cops and firefighters. I know they don't want to hear anything negative about their unions, but this is what's undermining us. And if we could stop people from giving them the tens of billions a year, we could save our country. And we truly could. And that's why we call ourselves For Kids and Country, because we're fighting for both, for the kids and the country. And we believe it's connected. And it's the reason we brought our case. And it's the reason we wanted to free people from being forced to fund them. You're not forced anymore. So I would ask those teachers out there that are scared, that say, I want these protections and I don't want to be bullied. And so I keep paying the union. I wish I could remember the quote from Benjamin Franklin. I don't have it memorized. Maybe Corey or Matthew does. But there's a quote about people who try to have, they want protections and freedom at the same time. They're going to end up with neither one. And that's what's going on here. If somebody could come up with that quote. We've given away our freedom. We can't do that. We have to fight for our freedom. And we have to fight for our kids and our country. So that would be my message. Adopt all those teachers out there and fight for our freedom.
Are you talking about the quote, those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety?
That's the one. That's the one. Thank you.
Good. Nice word.
Yeah.
So you just reminded me in your closing statement of another question I had. And, do you think post-Janus there's going to be a pretty substantial reduction in the power of the teachers' unions? I mean, Janus has been decided for a few years now, but I don't know if there's any, rigorous data on this, but just from your sense of it, do you think there's a lot of people opting out of their unions? And if not, or if so, tell me. But if not, do you think there's, maybe a role that individuals could play to inform teachers of this? Or
Yes. I'm so glad you asked this, because as we were bringing the case, and when the Janice case won, Mark, Janice, and I both kept telling everybody, this is the first domino, like I said before, celebrate for a couple seconds and let's move on. No, I don't think the power of the teachers' unions has gotten significantly lessened at all. I think they're very powerful, and as are the other government unions. And here's why. And I hope policy people are listening, because I predicted this was going to happen, and it has happened. I told them, I think about 15% of people will opt out pretty automatically. Those are the brave ones. Those are the ones at the tip of the spear, right? Those are the ones that already knew and understood. You'll get it. We already had like 10% opting out before. So you'll get another 5% with all the efforts to help them opt out, especially teachers, because teachers are scared. Okay, so you'll get them. But here's the problem. Here's what the unions do. They've bullied me for so many years. I know exactly how they work. Number one, they'll raise the dues on everybody else so they won't lose a penny. Number two, and they've done that twice. The National Education Association has raised the dues twice since Janice, and the CTA and all these other unions. Okay, here's the second thing. When you're a teacher like me and you're sitting in a mandatory staff meeting, they point at you. That free rider right there, that free rider. She's the reason we have to raise the dues on the rest of you. She's the free rider. Blame it on her. So what's happened, and I've tried to help policy people. It is insane. And I've tried to help policy people understand this. And I don't know if they're listening. Please listen. What's happening is teachers are more bullied than they ever were. Government employees standing up are more bullied than they ever were. They're the bravest people on the planet right now, because they're standing alone. And they're not paying, and they're doing the right thing for all the right reasons, but they're being bullied, and then everybody else's dues go up, and so now they're being bullied by their friends. So what happens? These unions are experts at divide and conquer, and they turn people against each other. I have teachers who were my friends for decades who won't talk to me anymore because the unions have told them to hate me. Mm-hmm. That's evil, and that's wrong, and that's why I keep saying. We have this thing we call Adopt a Teacher on our website for Kids and Country. It's the first menu item, Adopt a Teacher. It takes 3 minutes to read the flyer that we created on Adopt a Teacher. It's just 6 E's. Embrace a teacher, educate a teacher, educate them on what they're using. Just hand them a copy of my book. That's easy. But then you have to enlighten them. Now you know that you've been paying for the demise of your own profession, the demise of your own country, the demise of your own students, the demise of your own children. Okay, I know you're sad about that. Now I'm going to empathize with you. Okay, but I'm not going to leave you in a puddle. I'm going to empower you. How do you empower them? Actually help them opt out. We have all the information on our website, but don't leave them alone. Don't leave them. I talked to a teacher yesterday. She told me I'm the only teacher on my whole entire campus that has opted out of the unions, and everybody's bullying me. In the dark, someone will tell her thanks, but they won't do it with her. So what if the community came around them? What if you're in a church? What if your church came around them? What if you're in the PTA, which, by the way, has been corrupted by the unions? I have a whole chapter about that in the book. The local PTA parents are wonderful. I was a PTA teacher rep for many years. Wonderful people. But state and national, they're spending your money on all the sex ed and the anti-discipline policies. They're involved in all of it. They're not allowed to do anything the union won't let them do. That's why parents are out there striking with the teacher strikes, because they have to. So if we could just all get back together again, I cannot say it enough. Stand with a teacher, stand with a teacher, stand with a teacher. Come together, bring the community around them, and then we can chase these bullies off our campus. They don't belong there. The unions don't belong in our schools. They need to leave. And because they're not unions and they're not teachers. They say they are, but they're not. They're masquerading. And so we need to chase them off. You can't chase off a bully by yourself. You need to come together.
That's awesome. Well, this has been good. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for coming on and for taking the time. We kept you way past your commitment, and so you're a trooper for hanging in there and letting us bother you for so long. But this has been great. We really appreciate it.
Well, I'll tell you, you two are so delightful. You can invite me on anytime.
Uh-oh.
Well,
You might be back next week then. Don't say that.
If my calendar's open.
Yeah,
Well,
but yeah,
great.
thank you so much. And for the listeners, make sure you get her book, Standing Up to Goliath. Rebecca Friedrichs, great to have you. And, for the audience, until next time, this was the Educational Freedom Institute podcast.